that we think now, and the conditioning that we've had through the society and through our culture. And I can directly relate with that because as a Hispanic, growing up with a very, very like, I guess you could say, what would be the term, like direct. Very not so much direct, but very strict, very strict household. My dad was always the type of person that would limit our thought. You know, he would cut us cut and dry. Like our imagination, our creativity from a very young age was very limited because it was always sit down, you know, don't speak back, or what are you doing? You're making a mess. And so we start to like be fearful about exploring how we can think, how we can put things together, how we can be creative, how we can develop our brain. Because at a very young age, not only our parents, but like the type of systems that the schools have, it's like we're always taught to be a certain way versus growing up into developing into who we really are. Like you let your kids, Amanda, just explore your brain, pick your own brain. And like I love watching my child play, and I limit his screen time a lot because I want him to develop you know, that creativity. And I just like, he's like, look mom, I made this, and it's like one of the most proudest moments that I can feel. I'm like, you go baby, you do. It's a building. Yes, I mean, if that's what it is in your head, that's what it is. And I just love it. And it's very hard as an individual to realize that you know, we have so much potential, so much capacity. And I think it all starts when you start to become self-aware of that.
Yeah, it's funny that we were saying, like, with our kids, yesterday we were at the park and my son was playing. He's always wanting to make friends. I'm like, yeah, you go talk to strangers. I always encourage him to go talk to people. And so he was playing, and the kids and the adults, the parents come up to me and they're like, what is his name? I was like, Nine-Tail Fox. And they're like, what? Is it really Nine-Tail Fox? I was like, no, it's Alex, but right now he wants to be called Nine-Tail Fox. And they're like, where did that come from? I was like, I have no idea, but call him Nine-Tail Fox. And they're like, okay.
So I'm kind of the odd man out when it comes to having kids. I know all of y'all have kids, but what I want to ask you is, so we know the biggest influence in kids' lives, teenagers' lives, are their friends. Because everybody wants to fit in. And so whatever the masses are thinking, if they don't have a strong upbringing of how you're doing, Amanda, then they can definitely fall right into that groupthink mentality. Like, hey, I want to fit in. I want to meld in with these people. Have y'all seen any instances so far where they come home and they say, well, my friends have kind of told me this, or my friends think this, and you can see them being affected?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I have teenagers too, and I'm noticing that there's a lack of interaction. There's a lack of interaction with their friends. They're very limited to how much playtime that they get. And when they get to high school, they take out playtime. And I think it's so incredible that my older son, he's like, it's because of the government. Like, this mentality. He's like, the government, they want us to grow up and be boring. And I'm like, yes, you're right. You know, I believe you. I believe you. Like, yeah, I was like, I think you're right. The wall. He's like, they won't even let us down on the ball field. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe. But I mean, I think it's cool that he thinks like that.
That's awesome.
And I encourage him to have his own thoughts, because there's a book that I don't know if you guys have read, and this was one of my self-awareness that kind of gave me validation of a lot of the things that I believed growing up, by Napoleon Hill. It's Outwitting the Devil. And it talks about, and this book was written like back in the 1940s. So it applies to the world today even. So whenever you're reading about education and then the way that the government is, and it's like an interview with the devil, which it talks about in the beginning of the book, that, you know, it's whatever your imagination, whatever you want to think. If you really want to think that Napoleon Hill had this conversation with the devil, that's up to you. And as you're going through this book, it's just starting to make you think that this is seriously what's happening within our world when it comes to trying to get people to think a certain way
Yeah.
in our education system, in, you know, the government, in, you know, media, everything,
Yeah.
to the
Right.
point where we can't think for ourselves. So the most powerful thing, even what we're doing here, masterminding, you know, speaking up,
Yeah.
you know, talking about the things that most people don't think of talking about, that
Yeah.
they're suppressing. And in a way, I feel like that's living a life of almost being in hell,
Yes.
of misery.
I want to talk about suppressing,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes back into what we were talking about, our childhood, and how a lot of times we have things that come up in our childhood that we're not aware of affect us in our day-to-day life. And before I say that, though, when you were talking, I was thinking about the Birkins from Trolls. Sometimes I feel that way. Sometimes I'm at Walmart or Target or something, and I look around, and it's like I feel like I'm around Birkins.
Yes.
For those of us that don't know, what's a Bergen?
Birkins, you gotta watch Trolls. So Trolls are these little happy, you know what Trolls are, right?
Yeah.
The little figures. They're happy, and they're always singing, and they're lively. And then there's Bergens, and Bergens are these other trolls, and they're just kind of mopey. They just, like, they're darker colored, kind of in this gray area where they just mope around, and they think that they have to eat a troll in order to be happy.
Yeah. They have no happiness at all in their life.
Right.
Okay,
you
so
can-
kind of
you
like
can
people
see-
relying on other people to make them happy, or trying to fill their
That's a
void.
huge part of it. Yeah, and
To
you
make
can
them
see how
happy.
it relates. So going
That's a
back,
pretty deep childhood right there.
they all are. You watch
Yeah.
them all, and you're like, wow, this is some powerful
A
stuff.
lot of the Marvel movies, a lot of the Disney, like all of the movies that our kids watch, if you sit there and dissect them,
Oh,
you'll
yeah.
start to see that this is huge. This is like trying to tell us
Wow.
things.
They're all
and-
creative.
Yeah,
so.
but we don't see it like that. And that's part of being aware
Mm-hmm.
and mindful
Yeah.
and saying exactly great. I mean, I think that's, I want to watch it.
Yeah.
Princess Poppy.
I know, right? So I always felt happy, and I didn't realize how good I got at suppressing emotions. I always thought that I coped so well because I was able to move on and keep going, and it wasn't until my early 20s that I started having panic attacks. And everybody associates anxiety with depression, but I feel like it was very distinct. It was just strictly anxiety, and I had no idea where it was coming from. I would just be randomly working, and all of a sudden I would just feel like I couldn't breathe. And it kept happening more and more and more, and I kept feeling this pull, but I was just ignoring it because I thought, well, I enjoy my job. I enjoy my family. I have exactly what I want. What is happening here? So I decided to Google life coach. And what popped up was, there was a few, but one in particular stood out to me, and it was a hypnotherapist. And I had no idea what I was getting into. I never heard of hypnotherapy, but I was like, well, you know, I'm pretty desperate here. So I thought I'd give it a go. And a lot of people think hypnotherapy is when you're hypnotized, so you don't really know what's going on, but it's not really that way. So I can't speak for all hypnotherapists, but for this one in particular, you walk into a room, and just like what you would think, you sit down on a couch, and he starts to ask you a series of questions, and it kind of helps you to build that awareness and understand more about what's going on and think from a different perspective, or a little more about what could be the issue. And then he did this script, and it was where you feel this warm body of water start at your toes and then move all the way up to your head. So I was just in this very calm, relaxed state. It was almost like I was not even myself, like I was just floating. It's hard to explain, but then what he did was he brought me back to a specific memory. And this was not in my consciousness at all. I had no idea where this came from, but it was a moment in my childhood that was really difficult for me, that I thought that I had dealt with, but I never really dealt with. So he brought me back to this moment, and it felt so real. I never felt how that a memory feels so vivid and clear.
Like it was happening?
Yes.
Like,
And instead of me being the child in that memory, first person, it was me as who I was now, looking at that child and comforting that child and saying, it's okay, you're going to be okay. And I didn't know what to think. It was such a surreal experience. And I had no clue that it was something that I had held on to, this baggage, and how much it affected me in my day-to-day life now. So I want to be clear when I say I don't think that we should let our past define us,
Right.
but we do need to uncover those parts of our past and learn how to get through them. So that's what I did. It was 3 hours. It was draining, and I did 2 more of a series of events. And at first, you kind of feel almost numb, I want to say, because it's so much emotion to take on. And then I remember driving down the road, and I had to pull over, and I just started bawling my eyes out, like ugly crying. And I didn't know why I was crying, because it wasn't like I was having a flood of memories, but I felt like it was all of this subconscious feelings and things that had happened over the course of years that I was holding on to, and I was just releasing. It was like a detox for my brain.
That's awesome.
And then, of course, your awareness heightens. So you start to realize everything that I do, where this comes from. And at first it can be a bit exhausting, but I think that, and I'm sure you guys can explain this too, you get a hold of it after a while and you start seeing the benefits and how valuable it is for you.
So you start to learn how to release. And I was in a meditation class last night, and she had brought that up, like while we were in meditation, and she was saying, if you feel certain emotions, like if you want to cry,